The bell of St. Cuthbert's rang before dawn, its iron throat coughing sound into the mist-choked streets, and all Derwick woke the way it always did, slowly, reluctantly, steeped in filth. The sky was the color of old pewter, and the narrow lanes lay slick and shining as if varnished overnight. From upper windows, hands appeared, sleepy and careless, tipping chamber pots outward. The warning cry of, "Gardy Lou," followed, but often too late. Warm waste struck stone, wood, and sometimes flesh, splashing into the gutters where it joined yesterday's refuse. Steam rose faintly, carrying a smell so familiar it barely registered anymore: sour urine, rot, and the sweet heaviness of decay. Edith stepped from her doorway and paused, listening for the bell's echo to fade. She wrapped her shawl tighter, not against the cold but against the air itself. Breathing too deeply made the tongue taste bitter. Her boot sank slightly into the sludge between stones, and when she lifted her foot, it came free with a soft, obscene sound. She had learned the rhythm of walking here: short steps, eyes lowered, skirts lifted just enough to avoid the worst of it. The street was alive, not with people yet, but with pigs rooting through the gutters, rats darting from shadow to shadow, and flies already gathering where something edible, or once edible, lay forgotten. She passed a heap of refuse where cabbage leaves, fish heads, and broken pottery mingled with dung. No one thought to remove it. The pigs would eat most of it, and what they didn't would be pressed into the ground by feet and wheels until it became part of the street itself. Alderwick had no sewers, only shallow channels that overflowed whenever it rained, spreading the town's insides across its skin. Bathing was a rare thing, almost a suspicious one. Edith had been taught since childhood that water weakened the body, that it opened the pores and invited sickness inside like a thief slipping through an unlocked door. Warm baths were worse than cold, and soap was worse than water. Soap burned. It cracked skin until it bled, and blood, everyone knew, was dangerous to lose unless a barber surgeon decided it was necessary. So Edith washed her face with a damp cloth when she could, rubbed her hands with sand, and trusted her linen shift to absorb the rest. The shift itself was washed infrequently, beaten against stones in the river when it grew stiff enough to stand on its own. As she walked toward the market, the town slowly stirred. Doors creaked open. A man relieved himself against a wall without shame. A woman emptied slops into the gutter and wiped her hands on her skirt. Smoke rose from hearths, thick and greasy, clinging to everything it touched. It mixed with the stench of waste until the air felt solid, something you pushed through rather than breathed. At the market square, stalls were being set up on boards darkened by years of blood and brine. Fish lay in shallow baskets, their eyes clouded, flies crawling freely over silver skin. The fishmonger waved them away with a rag that had once been white. The butcher sharpened his cleaver on a stone, then wiped the blade on his sleeve, leaving a dark smear that would join many others. Meat hung uncovered, swaying gently, absorbing the smells of the square and adding its own. Nearby, the barber surgeon claimed his usual spot. His striped pole stood like a signal, red for blood, white for bandages. A man sat on the stool, jaw clenched, as iron tongs closed around a rotten tooth. The crack echoed sharply, followed by a wet sound and a groan swallowed by pride. Blood spilled into a basin already stained brown, and the barber wiped his hands on his apron, then reached for the next customer. No one recoiled. Blood was common. Pain was expected. Cleanliness was irrelevant. Edith bought bread, hard at the edges, and a pinch of salt. She exchanged coins sticky with grease and sweat, coins that had passed through countless hands without ever being washed. Her fingers felt gritty, but she did not mind. Dirt was constant, noticing it served no purpose. A monk passed through the square, holding a bundle of herbs to his face: rosemary, sage, lavender, murmuring prayers against foul airs. People believed disease rode on bad smells, invisible and malicious. If the air could be sweetened, perhaps it could be made safe. No one questioned why the herbs failed so often. She returned home as the sun climbed higher, warming the streets and coaxing stronger smells from the gutters. Inside her small house, she set the bread down and rubbed her hands with sand and cold water from a bucket. The water turned cloudy almost immediately. She poured it out into the street, adding it back to the endless cycle. There was no thought of waste, everything returned to the ground eventually. As she ate, she scratched absently at her scalp, feeling the familiar itch. Lice were a fact of life, as common as hunger. Children were shaved when infestations grew too heavy, their hair falling to the floor to be swept out with ashes. Adults endured. The idea of a body free from crawling things was almost unimaginable. Outside, Alderwick continued its mourning, filthy and unashamed. The bell was silent now, but its echo lingered in the stones, in the gutters, in the very air. This was life as it had always been, layered with grime, defended by superstition, and carried forward by people who knew no other way to live. When sickness finally announced itself, it did not arrive as a single blow but as a creeping certainty, the kind that slid through Alderwick like a rumor that refused to be silenced. A cough echoed too long in a neighbor's chest. A child burned with fever behind a shuttered window. Someone failed to rise when the bell rang. The town reacted not with panic at first, but with familiarity, as if illness were merely another season, as predictable as winter mud or summer flies. Fires were lit in doorways and at street corners, their smoke thick and choking. People believed flame could cleanse the air, burn away the invisible poisons that drifted on foul smells. Windows were shut tight to keep the bad air out, trapping heat, smoke, and breath inside crowded rooms. Bodies pressed together in darkness, sweating beneath layers of unwashed wool and linen, convinced that exposure was deadlier than suffocation. Clothes went unchanged for weeks. A shirt stiffened with sweat and grime was thought to protect the skin beneath, sealing it against disease. Fresh linen was dangerous, people said, it shocked the body, made it vulnerable. Lice flourished in seams and collars, marching freely from one host to the next. Fleas leapt from rush-strewn floors to ankles and calves, carrying death without anyone knowing their names or purpose. In the Lord's Hall, the sickness did not spare wealth. Tapestries hung thick along the walls, their colors dulled by years of smoke and grease. They were never washed, only beaten occasionally to dislodge dust, a ritual that sent clouds of filth into the air. Fleas nested deep within the woven scenes of saints and battles, waiting patiently. At night, servants scattered fresh rushes across the floor, fragrant at first, masking the smell beneath. Day after day, new layers were added. Ale spilled. Bones were dropped. Dogs and people alike relieved themselves where they stood. The floor softened underfoot, warm and alive. A physician arrived from a neighboring town, his presence announced with solemn nods and whispered hope. He wore a long coat and a mask with a curved beak, stuffed with herbs meant to filter the air. Vinegar soaked his gloves. He spoke of humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, and their imbalance. He prescribed bloodletting to restore order, opening veins with practiced ease. Bowls filled quickly, dark and steaming. The weak grew weaker. Some died. The physician shook his head and blamed fate, or God, or the patient's failure to follow instructions closely enough. He warned against bathing. Water, he said, tapping his cane against the floor, softens the flesh and opens the body. Disease enters through weakness. The townsfolk nodded, reassured. Their habits, filthy as they were, had been given authority. To change them would have been more frightening than death itself. Edith moved through this world with quiet dread. She helped where she could, carrying broth to doorsteps, sitting with the sick when families could not bear the smell anymore. She learned the scent of death before it arrived fully, a sweet, heavy note beneath the rot. When a neighbor died, she joined the women who washed the body, working quickly and with guilt. Water was used sparingly, cold and rushed, as if lingering might invite the same fate. Beneath layers of grime, the skin looked pale and fragile, almost unreal, like something not meant to be seen. The dead were wrapped in cloth that had known many lives before this one and carried through streets already slick with waste. Graves were shallow. The ground was crowded. Sometimes, when it rained, bones surfaced like pale reminders, and children were chased away from them with curses and sticks. As days passed, Alderwick grew quieter. The market thinned. Bells rang more often, sometimes twice in a single morning. People whispered prayers and clutched charms, bits of bone, scraps of parchment, dried herbs, anything that promised protection. No one questioned the gutters still flowing with filth, the pigs still rooting happily, the water drawn from the same river that received the town's waste. It had always been so. To imagine another way was beyond reach. Eventually, as it always did, the sickness burned itself out. Those who survived emerged pale and thinner, blinking at the light. Fires died down. Windows reopened. The rushes on the floors were replaced, not cleaned away, just buried beneath fresh layers. Life resumed its rhythm, altered only by the absence of familiar faces. Edith scrubbed her hands with sand one morning and paused, staring at them as the grit scraped away the grime. For a moment, she imagined washing them properly, with warm water and soap that did not burn, imagined a body that did not itch, a home that did not stink, a street that did not squelch beneath her feet. The thought felt almost sinful, like tempting fate. She poured the dirty water into the street and watched it disappear into the gutter, carrying a little of herself with it. The bell rang again, steady and indifferent. All Derwick endured, not because it was clean or wise, but because endurance was all it knew. Filth clung to everything, walls, floors, beliefs, woven so tightly into life that no one could tell where survival ended and self-destruction began.